Jacqueline, is that you? Oh, I'm not hearing you. I'm asking because your the name that pops up on your video is Julie Drummer.
She sounds like a chipmunk.
Yeah, I'm not.
Hear me here?
Oh, that was better.
Let's.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's 12 noon, and so we will go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by the Mankato Spirit team. We are recording the presentation as well. And I know people are jumping on, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We're happy today to welcome Jacqueline Karsten, who is the marketing coordinator at Drummers Garden Center in Mankato. She has a degree in geography, and it has developed into a passion for sustainable land use, as well as knowledge of all types of growing, indoor plants, produce, annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs. She's been with Drummers for about 3 years, and most of her education and firsthand experience comes from her own landscape and garden work and learning from other community gardeners as well. So Jacqueline, we're very happy to have you, and it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Getting this presentation together, I have to admit, was very difficult for me, only because there's so many different things I can show you and a lot of exciting combinations of plants. So I tried to keep it pretty simple because I like the idea of people putting their own inspiration and ideas into it. I want to give you the basics though and give you some inspiration in general. So thanks for joining and listening to a passion of mine. And let me share my screen here. Oh, I'll share this one. And let's see. Can you guys see that presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of myself on the side here because I don't want to see it. All right. So we're going to focus on container planting today and as well as garden inspiration. A lot of these combinations or ideas can absolutely be integrated into a vegetable garden, your perennial garden, and actually even trees and shrubs. I'm going to focus on the integration of edible and ornamental plants. And I want to just have you let go of this image of like a tidy, pruned, topiary type of landscape and even into your containers. Of course, it's a beautiful thing to just even see one type of plant. But we can be free of monoculture. We don't have to only grow annuals. We don't only have to grow produce, and especially in a certain space. So if all you have is a container, we can still integrate different types of plants together. There's many gardeners who haven't even thought about putting lettuce around their borders of, their perennial garden in the spring, but that's something you can do. So this is just an example of something that I'm actually passionate about and learning more and more about every year. This isn't what we're going to be covering, but this is just an example of polyculture, of using different plants to benefit each other. This is a whole different realm that you can go down in regards to growing plants. There's some plants that can even bring out different tastes. So if you plant chamomile around garlic, it actually can enhance some of the garlic taste. So it's a really cool, field to get into, but this is just an example of not planting radishes alone in a row, or spinach or beans, but actually integrating them in a plot together. So this is kind of a condensed version of this in a container. I'll show you some examples. So I want to call it though, because I'm kind of like, I like to have a fun spin, and I have the colors. It's got a kind of 80s look on this presentation because I want to have a little fun with this. So hopefully it's easy to read. But I want to call it fluffy foodscaping because the fluffy part is the pretty flowers and just the aesthetically pleasing part of it. And the foodscaping, it can obviously be in the garden and land, but also in your containers. You can have multiple containers if that's all the space you have to foodscape. So again, integrating edible and ornamental, and be free to mix plants. So think about their texture, think about their color, think about the flowers, think about the produce that you would like. So there's and I really like to have you kind of like, no, I've always wanted to grow tomatoes, or I've always wanted to grow strawberries, and kind of work with that and mixing them with other plants to create kind of a dynamic container. So talking about prep and care a little bit. So when mixing plants, you need to match the sun and watering needs. I would say this is the most important thing when you're deciding a combination of plants. And this goes for anything, any container that you're planting, tropicals, produce, trees, shrubs. If you want, or not in containers, sorry, for trees and shrubs, but if you're thinking about the sun and watering needs of plants and you're planting them near each other, it's really important. So for example, you can pair warm season edibles. Sorry, I went back there. Edibles such as peppers, which are they love the hot heat. They like sun, they don't mind getting dry. So think about pairing it with flowers and plants that can also take that type of environment, that type of sun and watering needs. So coleus, there are so many different types of coleus varieties that this is definitely not the only color you can choose. There's like just all purple ones, all green ones, reds. It's a really amazing plant. There's coleus for sun and shade. Celosia has these really crazy, weird, wavy flowers. That's kind of like a taller plant. Verbena has a wonderful smell to it. So sometimes it's not always about, okay, maybe I don't want to grow produce. I'm not there yet. I just want to grow something pretty. But this is actually a really great sensory experience. You can smell these flowers and they smell super citrusy, almost like candy sometimes. So that's actually a really fun plant. Vinca, really hardy plant. There's a perennial that you can plant in your garden as a ground cover, but there's also vinca that you can plant in an annual container. That's a wonderful spreading, trailing type plant. And then you can pair cool season edibles such as leafy greens, kale, lettuce, chard with, these are kind of these spring plants you'll see in our greenhouse now. Calendula, it looks like a marigold. It's a different family, but it's called pot marigold. Alyssum and petunias. A lot of people don't know that petunias can handle down to around 32 degrees, but not freezing yet. That will damage the flowers, but they're actually quite resistant to cool weather, which I love. They do actually prefer less than 80 degrees because once we get a little bit hotter than that, or actually I should say even 70, the petunias will not bloom as well. They might change their color even. So get petunias out early season if you'd like, because you can get that early flower. It's not just pansies and violas. Yeah, pairing with alyssum. I love alyssum. Look at how beautiful and bushy that is. And then of course the violas and pansies, they are an edible flower, same as calendula. So this is even examples of flowers you can eat, but I just want to give the side note that any flower that you buy from a greenhouse, you don't know if it's been sprayed with anything. Even if we don't spray it here at Drummers, we get some plugs in from vendors or just teeny little versions of the plant that we grow in our greenhouse. We don't know what they're treated with. So we do recommend any flower that you want to eat, either confirm for sure it's not been sprayed with any pesticides or herbicides, etc., or grow from seed. And we definitely recommend growing from seed if you really want to start containers early. So we're going to do some more combos later, but we do need to get into some more care because we're going to, you know, take all this time to choose plants and things that we like and put them together. And then we need to take care of them because they are living things. Definitely don't want any of this to be intimidating. I want, you know, planting and gardening should be fun. It does suck to lose plants. It's going to happen though. Plants, some plants just don't want to make it, depending on if we just missed a couple of days of watering or we never fertilized, etc. But I'm going to do my best here to just cover some basics so you can have a successful planting experience. So containers, location, sun, soil, and water. We're going to go first into containers. And some people don't think about the container as a part of care, but it is very important to notice how there's unglazed, glazed, plastic, and just another example, cocoa coir. You might see the cocoa coir that's like brown and within like a mesh or iron, I can't even talk, net, I should say. You see those hanging a lot. The unglazed containers allow air and water to flow in and out easier, and the soil can dry quicker. So it's something just to take note, especially if you're planting in a full sun area, it gets pretty hot. We do recommend to check water every day in your containers because of environmental factors with wind and sun. So it's just something to keep in mind. Terracotta is definitely a wonderful pot. I love using terracotta for the airflow, for the water flow in and out. Things don't stay soggy too long. A lot of my houseplants are in terracotta pots, but there's obviously less sun and less airflow inside. So outside though, plants like rosemary, lavender, aloe vera, peperomia, succulents, calibrachoa, moss rose. These are just examples of plants that don't mind the soil drying out a little bit before you water. For glazed pots, they tend to hold moisture longer and they can be a little bit more decorative, you know, because there's different colors. Some brands have pots that don't crack in below zero weather, which is something that we really enjoy here in Minnesota. But if they're small enough, I definitely recommend to bring them in just the garage. But sometimes we get those really big pots and we just need to leave them there. So petunias, basil, chives, canna, coleus, impatiens, all the plants that require consistently moist soil. I'd also recommend something like tomatoes, which don't like large fluctuations in moisture, to not do it in a terracotta pot or a pot that can dry out pretty quick. Or plastic, I should say, that tomatoes in plastic and or the glazed pots. So these can also hold moisture and can be decorative. The positive is that they're lighter weight, easier to pick up. So even in spring, sometimes our sun will change. Our trees are leafing out. And so the exposure of where you're putting a container might actually be shifting at this time of year drastically. So it's kind of nice when you have a lighter weight pot to move it around. So if you keep that in mind, depending on, you know, how many pots you want to plant, plastic is a really great option. There are so many wonderful new plastic pots that aren't just like, you know, cheap, flimsy plastic. They're super thick, still have a little weight to them, so it's not tippy. That's something that can happen with plastic. So if you're in a very exposed area for wind, think of plastic as it might be good to put some rocks in the bottom of a pot, etc. So, and then cocoa coir, I just want to mention because it's a popular material for planting annuals in. It provides really great aeration, even better than I'd say terracotta. It's aesthetically pleasing, kind of a natural cottagey look, and it's great for hanging baskets. They have it lined with plastic that you can poke holes in, and it dries out faster than other containers. So just keep that in mind as well with your with the type of watering that we'd like to do. I would say everybody, like I said, should check their containers every day for their soil. You'll start to learn more too as the plants are little. They'll take less water, but we'll go into water in a little bit. Sorry, I get ahead of myself. So there's many more containers you can use, you know, metal, wood. Just think of the air and water flow in and out of that material, and it'll help you. But the number one important thing about containers is drainage. Make sure that it has a drainage hole. There are beautiful decorative pots that don't have holes on the bottom. People place plastic pots in those decorative ceramic containers, but it still holds moisture on the bottom. So there has to be some way for that rain or your hose water to drain out, or else we will drown our plants. So there's me by the ocean forest, and soil is a very important contribution for healthy plants. So we can't just be digging up soil from our garden and putting them in a container necessarily. So characteristics of good soil is well draining and moisture retaining. And I'm purely really talking about container soil right now too. There's all different types of soil in our ground. So this is just based off of potting soil. So this is the material that will improve drainage. I kind of consider it more sandy. So soils that are labeled succulent, cactus, or orchid will contain more of these materials, the perlite, sand, vermiculite, gravel, wood pieces, and compost. And then there's materials that retain moisture. So I call it more spongy feel of soil. Soils labeled moisture control tend to have extra of these materials of cocoa coir, peat moss, and compost. And that you see compost in both of these materials because compost is an amazing aerator, gives you some really good organic matter that breaks down. It doesn't form, a lot of times if you form our ground dirt, we can, if you grab some dirt that has a heavy clay substance in it and you squeeze it, it'll kind of stay in a ball. Compost won't do that. It'll be moisture retaining, but then also be able to fall apart and be nice in aeration. So potting soils are a mixture of these and they're ready to use. So you don't have to worry about amending soil. You don't have to worry about any of these materials really. I just wanted to give you an idea of what potting soil is made out of. It's actually not dirt, it's not decomposing matter necessarily. Compost is, that's why it's an important part of potting soil. But the soil itself is not what you would generally get out of the ground. So there's slow release fertilizers that are in some of these. You'll see compost, worm castings, and other nutritional additions, which are a great way to not have to use additives or fertilizers. And it depends on the brand too. Some of them will say how much of each nutritional addition is in it, but these other fertilizers can be added to potting soil. Like our drummer's potting soil doesn't have any addition of like worm castings and things like that. It does have some compost, but we like to leave it up. We use our drummer's garden mix purely for planting our annuals and perennials, etc., because we want to leave it up to the people on how they fertilize it. We don't want to add a lot of extra in there. And these are just examples of things that we recommend for starting plants in the ground or in pots. This biotone starter is amazing. Here's the back of the bag. I'm showing the fungi and the bacteria that are added. I don't know if I can say it, mycorrhizae. A very new discovery. I shouldn't say very new, but recent discovery that plants are communicating and getting nutrients through these fungal networks under the soil. So the more that we help these networks, it actually helps the plant take up nutrients. So same with like the pH of soil. If the pH or the acidity of the soil doesn't match the needs of the plant can't take in the nutrients. So things like biotone starter helps plants take up nutrients and grow healthy roots, which is an important part of plant health. And then I also wanted to show Osmocote Plus, which is a very popular fertilizer that you can't burn your plant with too much fertilizer, and it has slow release capabilities. So you can just put it in your pot and not fertilize for months, which is wonderful for people who don't want to fertilize every month with a water soluble like a Miracle Grow. All right, so sun, very, very important too. Obviously, we can't be growing plants in a dark garage. So questions to ask yourself when you're deciding where to put your container, or maybe we don't have as many areas around the house that we'd like to grow, and we just have to work with what we got. So where do you want your containers? And then how many hours of sun does that location get? And then what type of sun? So location, I like to look at it in the cardinal direction of that location in relation to your home. This isn't the only way to decide, if you have a full sun location in the south, there could be a tree there that's blocking the southern sun. So that would make that area maybe part sun. But then we can go into how many hours that area gets. So even your north side of your house, but further away from the house, not being blocked by the house, can be getting full sun all day. So it really depends on the environment. And so that's why these are the questions that you should ask yourself going down the line of, do I have a full sun area? Do I have a part sun area? Do I have a shady area? And there's plants that are particular to each of these sun needs. And some plants do have a little bit more leeway or flexibility in regards to sun. Some of them are part sun to shade, which is really great plants to have. So just like I said earlier, with the spring sun changing and trees leaving out, you can have them in an area and acclimate them to more sun. And then as it gets a little bit more shady, they'll still be fine. So the types of sun, and I like to just really talk about more of the shade, is that there's dappled sun. So if there's like a tree you have or something blocking that kind of creates just parts of the container have shade on them, that's what I call a dapple shade. Deep shade is like north side of your house, like right next to it, that doesn't get much sun at all, or like deep into like a forest tree growth type area. That's deep shade. Bright shade can be like on the west side facing of a house. These are just examples. These can be in multiple different areas, but on the west side of the house, when the southern sun is shining and there's still some sun that's getting around the house and it's still like very visible, but there's a nice shade line that you can see, that would be a bright shade. So watering, our number one question we hear is, how much do I water? And this is a really great question. We love this question, but it's really hard to answer with all these different things that I've covered before. So the factors that affect watering schedule is the type of container, unglazed or glazed, type of soil, spongy or sandy. And these are not technical terms, spongy or sandy. This is just how I like to describe them by just like feel. And then outside elements, sun, wind, rain, and then the most important, plant variety. There's just some plants that will not take the soil drying out. There's some plants that want their soil to dry out before they get water. So whenever you choose a plant, look at their sun needs and look at their water needs first to make sure that they're going to be a good match for you. And I want to get into some plant combos now, just to kind of get a little break from care. Obviously, if you have any questions about care of the particular plants that you choose here in the store, we're happy to help you figure that out. There's even little, I think they're called, I forget what they're called, but they're gel that you can put in containers to help retain moisture and stuff like that. So if you have any issues of like, oh, I'm going on vacation, or how am I supposed to take care of these, we're happy to answer them. I wish I could get into all of that, but I want to look at some plants now, and I'm sure some of you want to get some good inspiration. So I'm going to focus more on these cool weather containers in this presentation, stuff that can handle this cooler spring and then go into the summer warmth, and they can survive all summer. I'm not saying that, oh, they're just spring containers. They just can handle this cooler weather. And this is the picture that we kind of started with, and this is a container I actually planted for myself a year or two ago. And I love the idea of using, you know, all of it's edible, but you know, there's mint, there's cabbage, there's a pansy, there's a viola. And I'm using a perennial mint here because mint is super hardy and tenacious. So, and then I'm gonna give you the container sizes too in the bottom. This is a 12-inch terracotta. And then I placed it in a tall decorative pot. So the moisture retention was increased a little bit more for this because I know the cabbage would need extra water to form itself. But I did want to mention, if you do like to plant mint, if you love mint, there's many varieties of mint that you can plant. But if you want it in container, I recommend keeping it in a separate plastic container because they will outgrow everything. Their little roots will start shooting out and they'll start shooting mint out throughout your whole container. And unless you use a lot of mint for like mojitos or something, it might get unruly by summertime. It's quick. I'm sure some of you have mint in gardens that you can never get rid of. So here's a couple other examples of flowers and with Swiss chard and this dianthus and petunias. These, of course, like I said earlier, these are not the only colored flowers you can get in these varieties. Purely just an example of you can have these tall, beautiful chard plants that you can eat. And I've heard people were harvesting Swiss chard all summer last summer. So you can have these containers all year, but for some reason, or all season, I should say, if for some reason you're done with your Swiss chard, you can take them out and then now you have these beautiful dianthus petunia pots. And if there's room, you can plant something else. And then, so for example, I'd add dill for like a lighter texture. You can even eat the blooms of dill. I tend to not go through dill as much as I should, and it goes to bloom. But the blooms are beautiful. The pollinators like it. It adds that extra element to a container. Here's another example from Covington's. I had to look all over online and it was really hard to stop looking for container ideas. But this is incorporating a house plant that you might see or a plant that you might see during the holidays. The cyclamen, it's centered right there. Cyclamen actually really love cooler weather and moist soil. So they're perfect pairing for some pansies, decorative kale, dusty miller. Dusty miller is another plant you'll see in the spring and fall. You'll see the pumpkins around that one. So that's why I say cool weather. It doesn't necessarily have to be spring. You'll see in the background too is dusty miller, and there's calendula, the marigold behind you too. And I'm guessing on this pot size, it's about 10 to 13-inch container. And then also it looks like there's about 3 pansy plants, you know, 1 decorative kale. Kale can spread out, and then you can split up some dusty miller in between. So this looks, I think, to me, doesn't look very, I mean, it's beautiful and it's cute, but for me, it's not tidy, but it looks very pleasing to the eye. So play around. You don't have to do, you know, multiple of each. You can do 1 of each plant. So the containers that you switch them in midsummer, you can create more compact planting. So what I mean by compact planting is that you notice this container looks really full. And guaranteed this was planted. And this is what we do for our fall containers. We pack it in there. There's not a lot of room for root growth. And that's fine because it's going to be a shorter lived season for these plants. So you don't have to, you know, leave room for a lot of growth. And this is an example of a fall container that we planted here with the chard, and the sedge. There's some, you know, osteos in there. There's some decorative peppers. It's all really compact in there, and you can still eat this Swiss chard, but you can also plant, you know, other things in amongst there, just showing you kind of the compactness of that. All right. So sometimes I do like even just simple containers. I think they look very pleasing to the eye, especially in like pairings or in groupings. So when you're deciding kind of, you know, I really love this plant and I want to see it everywhere, you can, you know, put it in multiple containers and then switch up, you know, maybe that center plant. This one doesn't have any edibles in it, but I wanted to show you just for that kind of the beauty of the look of simplicity, but then also the mixture of an annual container and cool season plants. So it's Dusty Miller, white geranium, which can also handle some cooler weather, and petunias and verbena. Verbena kind of drapes, the petunias fill out, and then the Dusty Miller grows up. So there's the three different, I think I even forgot to put in this presentation. So apologies, but there's thrillers, there's spillers, and there's fillers. So the filler here would be the petunia, the thriller would be the Dusty Miller, and the spiller would be the verbena. So when you're choosing plants, you can kind of decide on this design based off of those three different characteristics as well. I wouldn't worry about it as much because I think it can get kind of complicated. Really just choose plants that you love. And then it kind of works itself out, especially when you're planting. You'll know which one grows taller. You'll know if you don't even need to have it trailing if you don't want to. I don't want to put too many restrictions on people when they really want to grow something in particular or something together. This shows you how this container would look before it grew out into this fullness. So when you are planting small plants, just notice the space in between. You need to have room for this plant to grow. And that's why I wanted to show you before when it's compact planting that these plants are pretty full in general, and then you plant extra in the container to be compact. This is leaving room to grow. It can last all season long into fall. And I also wanted to mention getting houseplants into the mix. You probably see this this trend. We all wanted more houseplants this year, last year. It's okay to bring houseplants outside. So you don't have to go and like reinvent this whole container every season. If you have a houseplant that you love, these are tropical plants. Most of these are tropical plants that we have in a houseplant section. They like humidity. They like the sun. These are natural, more outside their natural environment. So don't be afraid to bring out your houseplants and mix them in a container. So here I planted a philodendron with lobelia, which is the blue flower, and then the polka dot plant, which you can see inside in our greenhouse or houseplant section, and it's also in our greenhouse. You'll see some plants like begonias, these polka dot plants, spider plants. Trying to think of other house plants that you can get during the growing season because they're used very often in annual containers. So, you know, kind of stretch your mind a little bit too without thinking you got to spend a whole bunch of money. You can use your house plants in a container. Oh, here, another example, spider plant with impatiens. They both can take, you know, part sun shade. So really great combination. We have this outside in a greenhouse right now, sitting next to each other. Different textures, different colors. Spider plants can have some trailing characteristic to it, and patients really fill out. So just another example. And then ivy. So you can buy ivy in the spring in our greenhouse and then bring it in for the winter. Some of the plants that are, I should say, like petunia, or I'm trying to think of other plants that might get powdery mildew. Some plants have a little more issue with being brought inside and overwintering because they don't get enough light without grow lights. And then other diseases can happen too without proper sun and air circulation. But ivy is a plant that people buy all year round. So look for those plants in the greenhouse when you're thinking of building out your containers. So these are characteristics you can look for for plants. So of course I cannot cover every single plant that works well in container, but if you come into the greenhouse and you look for plants that say compact growth, tidy plant habit, short stature in the name, description, or seed packets, these will be great plants for containers and probably specifically bred to be container plants. So for example, tomatoes, you want to choose determinate varieties rather than indeterminate. So determinate varieties will keep a bush-like shape and will ripen all at once. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. I'm sorry, I'm a fast talker, so I'm glad that you guys are recording this. So there's some examples there for you too. The San Marzano and the Amish paste and the Celebrity and Rutgers. I don't know how many of you are new gardeners. Tomatoes, and I'm bringing up tomatoes probably more often than I bring up any other plant because everybody wants to grow tomatoes because they're delicious when they're homegrown. But you can see some tomatoes have issues with blight. And that can be very frustrating for new gardeners to see any sort of issue happening with plants. So anything that's in like a compact or determinate variety will, they'll ripen all at once and, you know, the tomato will be done. It won't be continuing to produce fruit into the end of the summer. So there's less chance of late blight. And there's also blight resistant varieties. So look for that too. If you're new to growing tomatoes, look for resistant varieties. So it maybe, you know, helps reduce any frustrations for yourself. There's a lot of new innovative plant genetic mutations that are helping gardeners avoid issues like that. So again, if you have any issues like that, we're happy to help. There's fungicides, there's things to help, preventative measures. So I also wanted to throw in this edible flowers slide because the edible and ornamental can be this gray area too of being both. So here's a list of all of these flower names for you. And then I grabbed this beautiful little diagram of the flowers that are edible. So like I said, the viola and the pansies. I mean, if you want to grow strawberries, just grow strawberries in a pot and, you know, pick some blossoms and put them in a salad. Same with chive blossoms. There's perennial chives. So you can plant them in a container too, part of the year, and then plant chives into the ground. Some perennials, some ornamental perennials, I should say, that method will not work, but chives are pretty hardy. Chives can be moved around. Chive blossoms are so good fried on salads. Cilantro, of course, which always seems to be an herb that wants to bloom before we're ready to eat the cilantro and harvest it. You can eat the cilantro blooms. Kale flowers too, after you plant your kale in a container for the spring. And you maybe don't eat it all and it goes into flower, let it go, let that bloom, let it shoot up its spike and bloom and then eat the flowers. Pineapple weed I'm not as familiar with. Looks a lot like chamomile to me, which I don't, maybe that's what they're referring. Yeah, no, chamomile's on there. But then also the Mexican mint marigolds. So you'll see marigolds growing here. Actually a really great repellent of rabbits. So marigolds are recommended to plant around a veggie garden. I like marigolds in my containers if rabbits can get to my container. So a mint marigold is also edible for yourself. And chamomile is one of my favorite annuals. It reseeds itself every year. You can plant that around your other garden. It can kind of take over and be a little invasive, but in general, it keeps itself pretty much in check with the winter cold. And if you pick the flowers, there's less chance of reseeding too. Just a beautiful smelling plant though. I recommend trying chamomile any day. And then arugula too. Arugula loves this cold weather. It's really great to start from seed. So if you like arugula, plant that in a container. I'd say right now, and they grow really fast. And if you can't eat it all, let it bloom, eat the flowers. So a lot of times frustration is some things go to bloom too fast, but you can also eat them. So how many plants should we have in our containers? I have all these images together because it's like, oh, there's so many different choices and how many do I put in there? So these are just some, this is just, these aren't necessarily set in stone. It really depends on the type of plant you're putting in there and their habitat. So just like the tomatoes, if it's a really large tomato plant and it's an indeterminate, you're going to only plant one tomato in a container, one tomato plant. So, and you'll see it here. So like a 1 gallon container, approximately 6.5 inches. That all depends on the, on the style of pot. Is it shorter and wider? Is it tall and skinnier? So like 1 or maybe 2 plants. You're gonna need some root growth there. You're gonna need some upper space to fill out. So like the spinach and lettuce can get really nice and wide. So you can do, 2 spinach, 1 lettuce, depending on the lettuce as well. There's some smaller varieties of lettuce. So that goes back to that, the knowledge of a description, if it's a compact form, if it's great for containers. A lot of seed vendors and plant growers will give you that information. So you can decide how many plants to put in a container. 2 gallon containers are approximately 8.5 inches. So you can do 1 to 2. Again, these are not set in stone, but 1 beet plants, because beets kind of grow these big bunches. These short carrots, you can get carrots pretty close to each other. They just need probably a deeper pot. Any of the patio, you'll see patio too. I think I didn't even put that on a word that you should look for. It's like patio tomatoes or patio peppers. Very specific to containers and smaller size. Cucumbers, you'll see cucurbits as a plant that's harder to plant in containers because of their vining habit. You'll need space for that vine to grow out, but you can plant them in a container. It's just one per container. And then patio sized cherry tomatoes for like a 2 gallon container. And then typically all the full size or regular size tomatoes that you see growing here, you're going to see into like a 3 to 5 gallon container that we recommend people to plant up into. So that's about 11 to 13 inches. A lot of our pots, a container hanging plants are around in a 12, 13 inch container. So you can kind of see, maybe how full they get, how full plants get to help you. And then of course our staff too, if you have plants you absolutely want to grow, you can say, hey, how big of a container should I grow for or get for 2 or 3 of these plants? So back to that, the 5 to 7 plants for 3 to 5 gallon containers, or 1 to 2 large plants. So example, you can plant a tomato plant with basil sitting around it. Actually, these are both beneficial to each other. Basil actually repels some insects like the tomato hornworm. So I always plant basil around my tomato. As my tomato grows larger, or the basil grows larger, I might split them up, or I'll prune the basil back by half at least, to give the tomato some more room. So yeah, don't be afraid to prune some plants too. Maybe not tomatoes, but the plants around the larger plant. Eggplant, you can start peas around eggplants. For eggplant really needs a long time before it produces fruit, and it likes the really hot weather before it fruits. So you can start peas around it. So the timing of certain plants before they're ready to pick and eat, you can get those going if they're quick growers, and then plant it with something like an eggplant. And then that produces later in the summer. So examples are standard sized tomatoes, only 1 or 2, maybe for a 5 gallon. Bell peppers, 2 to 3, they need a lot of moisture. So you don't want to get them too busy in there. Eggplant, I'm just saying 1, actually, maybe not 2. Those get pretty big. Potatoes, only 1. Definitely recommend planting potatoes in a container. If you never tried, we have potatoes right now. Then you only need 1 potato and it grows a nice, big, healthy plant. and it doesn't take up much room. And then longer carrots, and then of course herb gardens. So you can plant 3 to 6 different type of herbs if all you want is planting herbs in a container. So I don't want to tell you what not to do, but I'm gonna have to let you know of these plants that don't do well in containers. There are people who have tried, and there's people have tricks and stuff. So I'm not saying it's absolutely a no-go, but things like pumpkins, watermelon, any large melon, perennials, trees, and shrubs. It's such a beautiful sight to see, like a nice tidy shrub in a container in front of your house. But their likelihood of living after you take them out of this container is not very high. Or overwintering a tree and a shrub in a container, or a perennial in a container, it's most likely going to die. This is a question that we get often when planting containers. So I had to add it in there because a lot of perennials have beautiful flowers, beautiful foliage, but they need to be in the ground. A lot of perennials have deep tap roots, a large root system, and pretty particularly water needs, especially in the hot, dry sun, and they do not want to dry out. Same with pumpkins and watermelons. They take a lot of water to produce their fruit. I did want to mention, though, that I did grow a sugar baby watermelon. They're these teeny little watermelons that maybe, gosh, not even the size, it's bigger than a softball, maybe about 5 inches diameter. And I had the vine up onto a trellis, and I tied the watermelon as it was fruiting with pantyhose, so you can actually hang the watermelon up. But it was very hard to keep up with the watering on that. It just would soak up the water, even if I'd watered every day. And they love that hot sun, or that bright sun, but then it makes it harder to water, especially if it's in a container. It can't pull from that the deep rooted water there in the ground. So this is the container that I showed you at the beginning, and how the cabbage filled out, the mint, and the pansies and the viola, because I just wanted to show that these are all edible plants all together, and I think it's beautiful. The cabbage I thought was safe from rabbits and such in a container up here, but it looked like later on the squirrels decided to eat it. So even if we plant in containers, we can't avoid all animals, but it's another reason to plant containers, to kind of keep it away from pests and animals. But you'll see how the pansies filled out, kind of, grew in between the cabbage leaves, the mint, staying nice and compact. And I think that's it for me. I hope, I think we got in time here within the hour. Yeah, 12:47. Great. So yeah, if you want to contact me with any of your questions, please feel free to email me. It's a busy time of year, so I apologize if it takes me, a day or two. You're always welcome to stop in as well and chat with staff. That's kind of the way that we really like to do it, because we can kind of show you the plants, and we can show you containers, etc. But of course, you can give us a call too if you have any quick questions for us. Just a busy time of year though, and we really like when people can, I know it's different this year, but if you can make it into the store, we're always happy to help you as well. So I think that is it for me. Stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That was awesome. A lot of good.
I hope it wasn't too much, or
No, I lots of good information. We, as I mentioned earlier, we are recording, so
okay, good.
I'll send that out to everybody who's on the call. And we had a few people who couldn't make it, who wanted to view the recording, so we'll
absolutely
get that to them as well.
Oh, I see a lot of people on here. Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and of course everybody's gardening experience is different, so it's hard to. Oh yeah, thank you, Julie. Yeah, gardening experience is different, and like I said, I'm more of the inspiration type person, and so if you come here, we have plant enthusiasts, like I said on there. So if you have no idea what to do, don't be intimidated. Come in. Growing's great. Plants are great.
Yes, and we have folks, of course, a number of people that are here in Mankato on this webinar, but we have some folks elsewhere around the country. And so
Oh,
thank you
really
for,
great.
yeah,
Awesome.
thank you for sharing your email, and I'll make sure I get that to everybody as well if they have questions.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody. I really appreciate y'all listening, and happy planting, happy produce eating, all of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, Leah Hansen, for setting this up.
Yes,
And
thanks, Leah.
everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks.